What if I promised you that I could help you overcome adversity, that I could help you find a greater sense of purpose, that your identity would be stronger, that you would experience more grit, more perseverance, more resilience? Would you buy it? Because Brian Davidson developed a technique that he calls MindVue. And this technique is to just help people understand who they are, where they are right now mentally, and recognize how that's impacted by what's going on around them. And I'll just be honest with you, I'm a believer because I have experienced what Brian talks about in this episode personally. As a competitor training for the Best Ranger competition, I've even done what Brian talks about today without even knowing it. I've done it as a coach and as a mentor while I was serving as a chaplain in the U.S. Army. So I'm excited to get right into it with Brian Davidson as we talk about grit, perseverance, and overcoming obstacles on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Dr. Brian Davidson, thank you for being willing to be on Unbeatable with me today.
Hey, thanks so much, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. It's great to be with you. I have been doing a little bit of cyber stalking and checking out MindVue, and I'm like, man, I love what this stuff looks like. I like what this guy stands for. So I'm really, really excited to get into this episode and let people know from the architect and the builder of MindVue who you are, what you stand for, but more importantly, what you're doing for athletes and leaders and just, people in general around the world.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you,
Where
Jeff.
did this thing start? What was the genesis for MindVue?
Yeah, so I often describe myself as an educator, Jeff. So my background really started off in high school teaching. And back when I was a teacher up in the Twin Cities, I was super fascinated in what made my kids successful. I thought it came down to intrinsic motivation and self-discipline in those students. So I had this background in psychology from my undergrad years at the University of Iowa, and was trying to figure out what made those successful students tick. And again, as I was learning about these great students, looking at what's making them succeed, it's like, okay, I got to figure out how these qualities develop in people. Like, where does this come from? So I came down to the University of Kansas and started a PhD program in counseling psychology and started to learn about all these factors like grit and resilience and hope, growth mindset, self-efficacy, all these different factors that we find that are important in many different life outcomes. And as I was learning about all these factors, I was like, my goodness, can we teach these things? Now, can we cultivate these skills to help people succeed and thrive? So that's when the light bulb went on for me and said, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, obviously you're a very smart guy. We can tell that by the diplomas on the wall. And I just couldn't help this. I know plenty of people that share your first name. There has to be a time or two that somebody sent you an email or a text and they got your first name wrong and they referred to you as Brain, right?
Happened about 3 days ago.
I was going to say,
fact, yeah.
So you really are a very brainy Brian, whereas everybody else, it's just a simple typo.
Well, but Jeff, here's the thing. So I study these things in the academic world. We call them non-cognitive skills. Okay, so these are the factors outside of cognitive ability that we find are super important for people throughout their life. So yeah, I mean, all the academic stuff, that's all great. But that's like one piece of the equation of success of individuals, right? There's so much more to what contributes to people thriving, succeeding, and performing well.
So what did you do? First, you taught in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. What did you teach in the high school level? And why were you teaching high school? Like, how did you end up in the classroom?
Yeah, good question. So let's go back to my undergrad year. So I initially started off with a degree in psychology.
At the University of Iowa, by the way. A huge shout out to the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Go Hawkeyes. Yep. So, I had this background in psychology. Then I was looking at that and like, hey, you really can't do a whole lot with a degree in psychology, right? It's like psychology and communications, probably two of the least, the beneficial
everybody
degrees
gets,
out there
but nobody uses,
themselves.
Right? That's the degree right there.
Exactly. So then it's like, okay, well, what can I do? Right. So here I found myself really interested in all these social sciences. And I was thinking about, okay, what can I do for a career? And so I thought, well, I could go teach, right? I could help, study a lot of these factors and help other students, learn about all these social sciences. And so that's the direction that I went, thinking that, at least for the time being, that's where I would start. I knew kind of deep down I wanted to pursue some form of higher education. Wasn't quite sure what that was at that point in time. but really it's my curiosity, Jeff, that kind of led me down this path.
So did you start off, let's say when you were a kid, wanting to be in the classroom, or did you just kind of stumble into it?
Yeah, no, yeah, really had no idea. Back when I was a younger student, I've again probably more from the curiosity side. Always kind of had this fascination on what made people tick and thrive. I was never really interested in all the psychopathology, all the deep dark stuff like depression, anxiety. That stuff never really attracted me much. But really kind of studying those people that are really performing well. That always kind of really got me excited and interested. And so trying to figure out, what makes people tick on the performance
Yeah.
side, right? What leads people to do well throughout their life and perform well. That's kind of what led me down this
What
path.
subject did you start teaching in high school?
So it was, taught mostly all social studies.
Okay.
So I taught anywhere from a civics class in ninth grade to world history, U.S. history, to psychology, 12th grade psychology, to a class called Today's Issues, which is like a current events class. So really a range of different social science
Yeah.
classes.
And obviously you must love it or been at least pretty good at it because you're still teaching a little bit, right? Adjunct right now at your alma mater.
Yeah, I especially when I started off with MindVue. So I was doing quite a bit of adjunct teaching and teaching in the School of Education there. Now, of course, MindVue
I
consumes
bet
the
it
vast
does.
majority of my
Yeah.
time. So I don't quite have as much time available for all those things, especially with having two youngsters and in the mix now with two kids. I love to spend some time with them too.
Well, this is a great time for the listeners to get to know you as a person, you as a man a little bit. So you got a family. Talk about your family for just a second.
Well, I'll probably start with the very important piece to all this equation is my wife,
Yes, you
Carrie.
better
So
mention
just
Carrie or else you're going to be in trouble.
remarkable spouse and wife. So her background is in nursing, and she's at Children's Mercy Hospital, downtown Kansas City. She's the ECMO co-director. So the ECMO is the program designed for the heart lung life support. So basically, it's the highest level life
Wow.
support
Children on
program that
life
they have.
support. That is a rough job day in and day out.
Yep, yeah, but it's amazing, Jeff, what they can
Yeah.
do, and the technology that they have. Basically, they can have these kids that 30 years ago, 100%
Yeah.
of them would have passed away, and now they can keep a high percentage of those kids going, and then to help them go on and live quality lives. And so it's absolutely amazing. Those days that I think I've got a bad day on my side, I just listen to what Carrie is talking about day in and day out, right? And puts things into perspective for sure. So she's a just a wonderful individual. Has been crucial in the development of MindVue, and all across the way she's been so supportive in helping me develop all this. And back in 2011, when I was initially kind of having some ideas about wanting to create MindVue, I kept talking about it with Carrie, and I'd say, I kind of want to create a company, but I didn't have the language, Jeff, to be able to talk
Right.
about it, because a lot of this research stuff and academia was still pretty early on. But, I'd talk to Carrie and say, gosh, I kind of want to do a company that works to develop resilience and grit and all these things that I was kind of learning and starting to investigate. And she's like, well, quit talking about it and just write it down. Okay. Start writing
All
down
right.
these
I
ideas.
like Carrie.
And so for my birthday, Jeff, she bought me a journal. And she said, okay, quit talking about this and start writing some things down. And that started the process for me as I started to write down all these goals, right, of what I wanted to do. I actually have the journal still to this day, and you can go back and look at the early version of our theoretical model that we have. And this rote model really is chronicled there in that journal. So, yeah, Carrie's been just incredibly important piece to helping me develop, all this that I've gone on to do today. But part of our family too, we've got two wonderful kids. So we've got a 9-year-old Henry, and he's just a remarkable guy, big into sports right now.
All
And so
right.
we've got basketball practice
Yeah.
tonight. I help with coaching basketball. He just absolutely loves and thrives in that. Soccer as well. And then my 5-year-old Charlotte's, our little spunky one, just a very determined little girl. She's in kindergarten and having a great time
Yeah.
herself. So we are very, very
Yeah,
fortunate
that sound
parents.
like a great time to be a parent. 5-year-old, 9-year-old, lots of ups, lots of downs, but a great time to have children, or great
Well,
age to have children.
Jeff, we're kind of in that sweet spot, right? We're outside of all the
Yeah,
diapers and waking up every night and
but
doing
they're
all
not
that.
moody
Kids are
teenagers yet. Yeah, it's perfect,
exactly, yeah. Everyone said this is kind of the sweet spot time.
right?
This is a great time. So we're definitely enjoying
Well,
it.
just for the listeners to get to know you a little bit better, this is my one theoretical question that I'm trying to ask all of the guests this episode or this season. And it's one day free. You can go anywhere, do anything, but here's the deal. You got absolutely no work. There's nothing on the horizon. There's nothing hanging over your head. So you can go anywhere you want. You can do anything you want for one day. Where do you go, Brian? What do you do? But the most important part of this question is why?
Yeah, good question. I would say, boy, either location wise, okay, I would either head to the mountains because I find that incredibly peaceful. Going up to Colorado, doing some hiking around, I absolutely love that. Or a second option would be hitting the beach, right? I definitely enjoy that piece and hearing the waves and all that. But probably more importantly than the location, I'd say who's with me. And that would be exactly who I
Yeah,
just talked about right there. Carrie, Henry, and Charlotte. Just being together as a family is something that I think is top priority and something that I love to do. So yeah, whether it's the mountains or the ocean, just get together with the kids and Carrie and have a great
I like
time.
the way you said that. It's not so much where, but who you're with. That makes that one day, the memory that you look back on and enjoy for a long, long time. You and I share a couple
Yeah.
things in common, not just both of us coming out of the state of Iowa, but I'm a theologian by training. I'm a student of leadership. That's really where my fascination is. But I'm a closet sociologist. I am just in awe of what makes people tick. And I think we as the academic community have barely even scratched the surface, not even seen the tip of the iceberg of really understanding what makes people tick. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about those kids in the high school classroom because let's face it,
Hmm.
some teachers are out there, they just care about their career, they care about a promotion, they want to do well on test scores, and you're looking at some of these students and you're like, I don't understand why some of these students are doing really really well. And if some of those students are doing really well, can we capture that so that all of the students can do well? So what was it about
Hmm.
the high school classroom that made you say there's something going on here? There's something more than meets the eye, right? Because
Well, when you're teaching, you've especially at the high school level, you've got 160 kids often that are coming in and day out into your classroom. So you get to see a
yeah,
lot. And so okay, so I'll give you some background to creating MindVue. So I initially started off in the counseling psychology
uh-huh.
program at KU. Okay, looking at all these positive psychological factors: grit, growth, mindset, resilience. And then I started questioning, could we teach and cultivate these things? So, Jeff, I was working in a university counseling center doing therapy with students. And I started to think to myself, gosh, we've got this so backwards. We wait,
Yeah, we'll wait
Jeff,
until there's a
until
problem.
somebody's struggling. And as opposed to, could we work to teach and cultivate many of these positive psychological factors rather than fixate on the psychopathology and we're going to slap a label on this student or this person and say, okay, now you've got depression, right? Now we're going to try to treat that depression. Could we focus much more on the proactive nature of this? Develop the resilience, develop the hope, develop the grit, develop the self-efficacy, the confidence to accomplish our goals, the mission and purpose and what it is that we're doing, those bigger factors, as a way to prevent a lot of that psychopathology from developing in the first place. And so that's when I started to think, okay, how can we teach this? So then I returned back to the classroom as I was finishing up my graduate work. So I finished up in educational leadership and policy
All right.
studies. I was growing really interested in what made successful leaders tick. And so I thought, okay, if I could get this background in leadership and a little bit of business management, HRs to help me out with developing this company, that would be very beneficial. Well, during that time, I returned back to teach as I was paying my way through school. And I started to test out these ideas with kids. And so back in 2011, when I talked about the journal there with
Yeah.
Carrie, in 2012 and 2013, I started to develop this assessment. And I initially started to assess all these students in school. And we found that all these positive psychological factors were correlating incredibly well with students' academic performance, how they were doing in school. Then just anecdotally, I could also see, hey, like, this kid really
Right.
struggles in school. There's a lot of issues that are going on with this student and they're low in a lot of these factors. And so from there, I was trying to figure out, okay, how can we cultivate these skills? And so I initially started off with an after school program designed to see if we could put a dent into some of these factors. And we did kind of a pre-post test analysis to look at how did students score when they came in, right? And then after this intervention, this 10-week after school program, did they show an improvement in a lot of these skills? And we found in all the data, yeah, that we saw growth and improvement. So it gave me hope at that point in time that yes, we
Yeah.
can influence these skills, right? They're not set in stone or hardwired
Uh-huh.
into us, but we can cultivate these factors. And so that's kind of where this originated for me back in the classroom and in the education
Yeah.
sector.
Well, so for the people that are listening to this podcast, not watching it on YouTube right now, if you kind of tuned out, let me just point out something that Brian just said, because the average researcher, when they see a group of students and some in that group are struggling, they're immediately going to go to the struggling students and ask, why are they struggling and what's causing them to struggle and how can we help them not struggle? Brian, your brain works very different because you see a group of students, you see students that are really doing well. Of course, you notice the students that are struggling, but you ask a very different question. Why are these students doing well? And could we replicate what's making them do well for the students that are struggling, which is a radical different approach to helping students, helping people succeed in life, and maybe a
Well,
much more productive way of helping people succeed than just dumping money and resources at the things that we think are causing students to struggle. Don't get me wrong, there should be money and resources to help struggling students, but maybe a better approach is figure out what the successful students are doing and replicate it with those that are not so
well,
successful.
and it's this belief too that everybody can be successful. Every student out there can be successful. Every employee in an organization can be successful, but we also have to create the conditions for them to succeed. This is something that's been really interesting as we've started to assess more and more groups with this tool, Jeff, is, we would see these individuals. So let me fast forward in that story. So after I, started off to develop that assessment with those students, we started to do more testing with adults out there in the workforce. And I was trying to study these high performing individuals, right? CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
generals in the military, university presidents, you name it, people that are on all means and purposes, right? They're doing really well in life. Well, occasionally we'd come across these individuals, Jeff, who we would look at them and we would say they are the epitome of grit and
Okay.
resilience. Like, just look at what they've accomplished in their life and career. And then we would assess them along all these factors. And sometimes we'd see that they would score quite low. And at first we were like, what on earth is going on here? Like, why would the person answer the items that way? And then we'd go on and have a conversation with many of these individuals to inquire, what's going on in their life or what led them to answer the items in that particular manner. And Jeff, it was so surprising. We started to hear the same story of, yes, this person had accomplished all these remarkable things. They were making, many cases, gobs of money, had great
Yeah.
titles and roles and positions and all that. But internally, they were miserable, that they had very little sense of passion for what they were doing. They were burnout in their work. They were going through the motions, counting down the days until they retired, going through
Yeah.
divorce, or something was going on in their life where we came to understand with a lot of these factors like grit and resilience and hope, it's not so much a trait of an individual that somebody is just going to be a motivated, gritty, resilient person. But instead, what it seems to be the case with many of these skills, it's more of a snapshot for how motivated is this person
Right.
feeling, how gritty are they feeling, how resilient are they feeling, and if we can work to elevate these skills in people, that's when they can really thrive.
Yeah, so I want to just point out what you learned is it's not so much innate skills, though there are some people that have innate skills in an area and the general population doesn't. It's not innate skills that led to these people becoming breakout leaders and, captains of industry, for lack of better phrases, but there's something else going on. And I can't help but think that the listener right now is saying, okay, Jeff, this sounds like an infomercial. Let me make sure that the audience understands why we're talking to Brian on this episode of Unbeatable, because virtually every guest that I've ever had on this podcast all shares some similar traits that Brian has discovered, Brian has helped bring out of people, Brian coaches in other people. And the traits are all the same. When life got rough and they were punched in the face by circumstances, no fault of their own, laying flat on the mat and just hurting while they were down on the mat, these guests all had a choice to make. Am I going to stay on the mat? Am I going to let life keep me down? or am I going to dig deep inside and will I find the strength to get back up and to face whatever happens next and keep getting back up? And this is where the word unbeatable comes from. No matter what life throws at me next. And you've really, look, the word is trademark. Don't steal my word, Brian, but you're really helping people be unbeatable with MindVue. That's really what you're doing, right?
Well, Jeff, I would love to study you, right, as an individual, as somebody that has displayed all this grit and perseverance. And as before we hopped on this podcast here, of course, learned about your background and heard the story and the Black Hawk Down and all that. And for me, it's so fascinating to help understand like what led you to be able to
Yeah.
persevere. And you've seen some horrific things, right? I remember watching a video how you said you had some soldiers beside you who were killed literally just feet away, right? And how do you go through that experience and to deal with that, see that, and then to come out of that in a positive way to then use that experience to then help enrich people?
Yeah.
Can you help me understand, what contributed?
Yeah.
to
So
that?
for the listener, you and I were just talking right before we started recording this episode, and both of us were saying, man, what a privilege to be able to be around people that have these incredible stories and I get a chance to hear these stories every day, all day long. How can you not be a better person? How can you not be a better researcher, a better teacher, whatever, a better stay-at-home mom when you hear these incredible stories of people that just went through amazing hardships and persevered, didn't give up, made it to the other side. And for some of them, it was very costly and their life will never be the same, but they ended up stronger on the other side of it. I had the chance to be surrounded by people like that when I was in the Army, and it left a really big impression on me. And most 99, and I'm trying to not exaggerate here, 99% of what I was able to accomplish in the military in combat was based on the guys and gals that were with me on the battlefield. But
But then what as you transitioned out of that, okay, moving from being the soldier into doing what you're doing today, how have you continued to have that
yeah,
hope, right? Have that grit and
yeah.
resilience
So
to push forward?
my heroes are warriors. Those guys and gals that strap on a gun and put on a uniform. I'm talking law enforcement as well, and defend their community or defend their country. I'm blown away by the level of commitment and sacrifice. And when I retired from the Army, I wanted to stay around people like that. I wanted to continue to serve my heroes and be around them. So we retired in a military community, and I'm inundated with guys and gals that are just incredible, have amazing stories. So, how can you not be inspired by that? How can you not get up and be ready to tackle whatever the day throws at you? And there are some bad days and some good days, but how can you not tackle those days whenever you're surrounded by people like that?
Well, it sounds like you've got a strong sense of purpose
So,
to this
hey,
day.
I'll just shoot straight with you. If some of my friends from the Army were listening to this episode, they would start off they may not say it out loud. Actually, they're kind of rude, or not rude, but they're just very blunt. So they would just tell you, I don't believe in all of this psychology and MindVue baloney. I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you why, Brian, but then I'm going to ask you a couple of hard questions like I was one of those friends trying to figure this out for the first time. Because I trained for and competed in the Best Ranger competition for a couple of years. And when I was training for Best Ranger, I stumbled across a few articles about some of the most talented endurance athletes in the world. And they were all doing the same thing. They were doing a little mental preparation, no matter what the sport. They were all doing a little mental preparation for it. I had been training on my own for a while. I'd had a coach that had been training me, but nobody was talking about this mental preparation. And I started thinking when I was reading these articles, I don't even know if I believe in any of this baloney, but I'll give it a try because I trust some of these really talented athletes. And so I started doing a little mental preparation for the way that I wanted to execute something in this extremely complex or very challenging competition. And I started to notice, man, my performance is really, really improving. Like, you can't chalk this up to working out harder in the gym. Something else is going on here. And I started to get really focused on this. And for the last 2 years that I trained for and competed in that competition, I put a lot of personal time into mental preparation. Um,
Mhm.
and as I started studying up on MindVue, I was like, my buddies would all say this is a bunch of baloney, but I know from personal experience, just stumbling into this, that it's not. And I'm living proof that it made major improvements in my performance, um, with, in performance improvements that I couldn't accomplish by hard work in the gym.
Well, as an academic guy, right, I look at what's the research say, right? What is the data? Yeah, we can all have this anecdotal stuff, and that's all great, but what does the science really tell us? And the science tells us that many of these skills, right, they're predictive of
Yeah.
so much, Jeff. Anywhere from academic performance in kids in school to workplace performance. In my own dissertation at the University of Kansas, we looked at the relationship of these skills to successful leadership behavior, transformational leadership, and found that they were predictive of who's demonstrating successful leadership skills. Behavioral economists get their hands on this data today, and they're looking at the importance of these skills for labor market outcomes and who's making more money throughout their life and who's more likely to be employed. Even like voting
Yeah.
behavior is predictive of these skills. And then importantly, and maybe most importantly, is the health and wellness of all this, is that, many of these factors are predictive of not only physical health outcomes and things like longevity in people, but also those mental
Yeah.
health outcomes. What we know about a lot of these factors is that they serve as buffers against a lot of that psychopathology, that depression, stress, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and some of those pieces, that many of these positive factors can help thwart and buffer against some of those more challenging
Yeah.
issues that we sometimes face in our
Yeah, I
lives.
totally agree. So I'm trying to tell the listener, if you're sitting there and you're driving in your car and you're thinking, I don't know if I really buy any of this, I am living proof that just focusing the most important muscle, let's be honest, it's an organ, not a muscle, but focusing your mental capacity makes far bigger improvements than in the gym or on the track. And my buddies wouldn't believe it. I think some of my buddies to this day still don't buy it. So now, Brian, I want to ask you a few questions, like I'm one of those guys that's not sure I buy any of this stuff that you're talking about. When you start talking
Sounds
about
good.
MindVue and that being predictive, I need to know, how does this work? And I'm a very simple guy. So in layman terms, explain to me what this is and how does it work?
Well, so with our work, it's really starting with that assessment. Okay, it's going to give you a glimpse, an idea of what is going on in your mind relative to everybody else out there.
And
Okay, so this is
can
not
I,
a
I want to clarify, it's at a moment in time, right? It's not,
it's a
yeah, it's
snapshot.
not
Yeah,
all
this
inclusive.
is what we've learned. Yeah, Jeff. So again, what we've learned about these factors is it's not a definition of who somebody is. That we can fluctuate up
Right.
and down in these elements over the course of our lives. At one point you might be feeling incredibly motivated. Fast forward 5 years, okay, and that motivation can
Yep.
plummet based off of everything that's going on in your life, and all those external factors, Jeff. That stuff makes a difference. All those sociological indicators and those elements going on in your life, that can influence your sense of motivation, that can influence your sense of grit and perseverance and your resilience and hope and all that. And so the sad reality is everything is constantly
Yeah.
changing in our life, and so these factors by no means exist in some sort of vacuum in our own mind, but instead they're this beautiful dance that's going on between what we are thinking and feeling and all those thoughts that are going on up here between our ears, and then what's happening on the external world for us, and then there's constant back and forth that's going on.
That's
And so
interesting.
that's
And your imagery is interesting because I don't think I've ever really considered it like a dance between what I'm seeing and what's going on in my mind and what's actually happening in the world around me. And sometimes, let's be honest, if you're not dancing well, you're going to step all over each other's toes. Sometimes, if you're really not dancing well, you're going to stumble and fall. So it makes sense to try to get what's happening in your mind dancing well with what's going on around you. But it starts with the,
and we're starting to see a
yeah,
acceptance of this too, right? In the importance of our mindset. You're seeing it in sports, right? You're seeing more mental
right.
performance coaches come about. This is becoming a very common thing. You're hearing about mental health and mental wellness, of course, and the importance of that in a person's life, both in sports and in military. So there's just growing acceptance and understanding that, that there's more to the equation of
Yeah.
success than all these traditional indicators that we've looked at in the
Yeah.
past.
So here's the secret. The way that this all started for me is I had been training and competing in the best ranger competition. I had a buddy who had a friend, it always goes that way, who was an Olympic athlete. The friend was visiting, and the friend came over to my house, Olympic gold medalist. And I started asking him a few questions about the way that they were training for the next Olympics. And he started talking about his mental preparation. And I'm like, hold on, man. This sport that you're in is just raw power. I would think you would be in the gym throwing up a lot of weight. And he started explaining this to me. I started reading a few articles, learning from a few other endurance experts. And it occurred to me like everybody's doing the guys and gals that are really doing well in their sport, all different kinds of sports, they're all focusing really intensely on their mind as much as on their physical performance. And it's making a huge difference. So it starts with the assessment, but I don't understand what happens next.
Well, so what we often see is it's an eye-opening experience for a lot of people. Jeff, pretty much everybody that we've ever assessed, thousands and thousands of people from all across the world, okay, they tend to score lower than what they anticipate in at least one or two or some areas.
The
Okay.
best thing since sliced bread.
It's been incredibly
Sure.
fascinating to see, right? That in our own minds, we think, okay, yeah, I should be scoring quite well in all these areas. Everyone goes in thinking I should be the 95th percentile and higher in all these areas. Well, just by this sheer understanding of how we calculate all these, if we assess 100 people, well, 9 of them are going to score in the 9th percentile or lower, right? And so this gives you a glimpse for how you're thinking and feeling relative to other individuals. And once you can see that, okay, that's when we start to see the light bulbs go on for people. And you can get that understanding for, okay, where am I at relative to other people? And then we'll often hear, okay, yeah, I know I haven't been feeling great, but this really opened up my eyes to see where I'm at this particular point in time. So that's kind of step one in the process of getting that understanding for where's your mindset at.
All right. So, next step in the process, now that you've got the assessment results back in, what does MindVue do with the individual next?
Well, I don't want to fixate on just what my view is, but I think more importantly, what can people do to help cultivate these skills? And Jeff, what we find is most important is people.
Yeah.
Okay, that people transform people, and if you can have a caring, supportive mentor out there, okay, who can see what's going on in a person's mind, now they can do something about it. I think back to when we were working with one of these ROTC programs across the country. They had this number one ranked cadet based off all their standard Army criteria pieces. Okay. And I get this call from the professor of military science saying, Brian, I need to talk with you. And I said, yeah, what's going on? He said, our number one ranked cadet just scored in the first percentile on your assessment. And I said, okay, tell me more. He said, this kid's doing well academically, right? He's performing well. He said, he's our top ranked cadet. We feel like he's got grit, he's got resilience, but your tool here is telling us otherwise. Like what gives? And so I said, well, let me look at the data here and let me dig in, make sure he answered everything kind of honestly and didn't straight line and just answered the same item all the way through. Looked at it and said, no, definitely took the assessment seriously. I recommend that you just go and talk with them, have a conversation with them. And so then they had these one-on-one debriefs with each one of the cadets, and that cadet went on to say he was absolutely miserable in doing what he was doing. Here he was succeeding on all the traditional indicators of success, but internally, in his own mind, he wasn't feeling great. And so now they could see this and have those conversations to help guide and mentor him, support and coach that individual to get him into a better spot. This person was largely pursuing this work and becoming a military officer out of kind of family expectation that he had a family member. Yep. And he said, I don't really want to do this at all, but I want to pursue something else. I mean, then they were able to have those conversations, those life-changing conversations with him. And that's what we find time and time again. It takes, Jeff, one caring, supportive person, right, that can inquire about somebody in their life that can then change their trajectory, right? I think back to my own experience back when I was teaching school and trying to figure out my own journey. I was trying to figure out what direction should I go. I knew deep down I wanted to create an organization like this, but I didn't know how to do it. And here I was being trained to largely become like a principal or superintendent of a school system. And I was talking with my principal at the time, and I was scared out of my mind, Jeff, to tell him this, but I thought, I kind of want to tell him what I really want to do, that I want to pursue this work and working to help measure and develop resilience and all these other factors. And so I told him, I said, I don't want to be a teacher. I don't want to be a school principal. I really don't even want to be a superintendent, but I want to develop an organization that would help measure and foster a lot of these factors that I'm really passionate about. And Jeff, his response to me was life changing. He looked at me and he said, Brian, what can I do to help you get there?
Wow.
Because here I thought, this is a guy who's going to look at me and say, well, what are you doing here? You're wasting my time. Right. But as a caring leader, he said, what can I do to help you? He showed that he cared about me as a person, my future, my passions in life, and then went the next step to say, what can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Right. And it's those sorts of things that leaders do that can make a world of difference in a person throughout their life.
It can change one person's life. Actually, it could change a lot of people's lives, because that one person goes on and makes a big impact on a lot of people, which they would have just been miserable and going through the motions for the rest of their life, if not. I kind of want to ask you, this is the part of the conversation that I was really looking forward to getting to with you, Brian, is this helps people who are struggling with mental wellness, and they helps them find grit and develop resilience and go through, handle some of those moments in life that could beat them. This helps people become unbeatable. But I want you to help the listener understand, how does just understanding and doing the assessment and getting a snapshot, how does that help you develop grit when life gets really hard? How does that help me handle the stress of family crisis or financial problems? Explain to me what happens next.
Well, so the assessment piece is just step one,
Yeah.
right? That's the awareness piece. From there, it's asking, okay, what can we do to help develop these factors? And so then go back to my days of being a teacher, developing that after school program. Okay, well, I work to develop content, and then to see whether or not we can put a dent into these factors. And what we've done on the MindVue side is developed out these learning modules and all this content to help foster these factors. But what we find is the most important piece, Jeff, is that coaching element. Okay, it's having somebody who can help you navigate through all those challenging times. Somebody that's either gone through some adversity themselves, some great performing leader, right, who's gone through some challenges, the ups and downs that come along with leadership. We find that to be an incredibly important piece. It's having that human element, that coaching piece to help guide people during those challenging times. Because listen, every single one of us, me, you, everybody listening to this podcast, right, we're all going through something in our life. Right. And we're not alone in the adversity that we face. And sometimes it's just so beneficial to have somebody who can listen, right, who can help guide and mentor and support somebody through the challenges that they're encountering.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance in just a second to talk about the scientifically proven results of this, but you don't even, I've already told you, I cyberstalked you. I've already looked up your results, but I didn't have to look them up because I've already seen this firsthand. We're right now kind of 2023, we're the last couple of years at this explosion in mental health challenges worldwide. I'm using the word challenges because some are very severe, some are very minor. Much of it was brought on by the change, the trauma, the loss of COVID, but there are still lots of people, like 800% increase in mental health challenges, the stress, the anxiety, the adversity that went along with those things. And some people are not handling it well. And I keep trying to encourage the listeners, hey, if you're struggling and you're really, really in a bad way, reach out. Don't try to handle it on your own. But I tell you this quick story, Brian. And this is something that just for the listener, if you're hearing Brian right now and you're saying, I still am not sure. Well, let me tell you how convinced I am that the coaching that he's talking about right now really does make a world of difference, can change somebody's life. Because I worked for a boss. I was his chaplain, which means I was not part of the chain of command. I was kind of on the special staff. And the people that were normally trying to compete for promotion and the next raise and the next level in the military, none of them were in my food chain. I wasn't in their food chain. So my boss said, Jeff, I want you to observe, assess, and then give feedback to every leader in my battalion from this certain level on. Now I'm talking hundreds of leaders. And I developed kind of on my own this 360-degree assessment where their boss would assess them, their peers would assess them, the people that work for them, their subordinates would assess them, and then I would be the only person that gets all the assessment. Excuse me. And I would collate all the results, and then I would sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with them. So let's just say, nice round number, 100 guys come in to sit down with me. They have no idea what the results are, but they've all went through the same process. And I start to read the results to them. And no exaggeration, Brian, 25, 30 of those 100 guys, 25, 30% of them totally blow everything off. They're like, no, that's not me. That's not accurate. I'm not like that. I'm different. That may be the other guys, but that's not me. And I in some of those conversations, I'm just sitting there with my mouth open, like, how could you be such a moron? Look, I'm not getting anything out of this. I don't get promoted for this. I'm not, the boss doesn't even get a chance to know what I'm seeing. And this is purely for you and for your own good and to help you be a better leader. Here's what people are saying about you. And they're like, yeah, but that's not me. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. And most of those leaders, no exaggeration, are no longer in the military. Some of them that had the absolute worst results got in my office, let me tell them kind of what everybody said about them. And after a long, hard look, they said, you know what? I got some work to do. And then they went out and did some work and became much different, much better leaders in the future. And I cannot forget that 25 or 30% that just looked me in the eyes and said, yeah, I don't believe it. All of this is wrong. I'm like, I don't know why you wouldn't look at this gift of an assessment of who you are and where you're at right now. Why I don't understand why you wouldn't take that and learn from it and grow from it. But there's a percentage of people out there that no matter what you do, they won't buy it.
Well, Jeff, in our language, we call that more of a fixed mindset. So Carol
that's
Dweck
a better word than moron, because I just call them morons.
Carol Dweck out of Stanford developed this concept called growth mindset, and along a continuum from growth mindset to fixed mindset. And some people will have a much stronger fixed mindset where they think, well, I just have this talent, I have these gifts, I have this incredible intelligence to me, and really, you can't really change that in a person, right? You just kind of have it or you don't. Other people have much more of the stronger growth mindset where they believe no matter how much innate talent or ability you may have, you can always grow, right? You can always improve. And so it sounds like you had many of those leaders who had that stronger growth mindset who said, give me the information, give me the data, right? Even if it's not great, okay, I want to know that because that's going to help me get better. Whereas some of those leaders had much more of that fixed mindset, said, if you're going to tell me bad stuff, I'm going to put up that wall because you must be full of a bunch of crap, Jeff. If you're telling me this because, well, I think otherwise. And so, what we want to try to do is get people to cultivate that stronger growth mindset that welcomes that feedback, even if it's not good, right? And that feedback is what ultimately helps us grow and get better.
Yeah, for a few of those, and I'm talking 2 or 3 of them, they got the worst possible results that you could expect. They didn't see this one coming, but they sat there. They were very reflective. They were very thoughtful. And then they just took it as honesty. Like, okay, if that's what people see, I don't feel like I'm doing that. But if that's what people are seeing in me, then I got to make some changes. And wow, did they change and blew the next year, blew people away by the rate of change. So there's some hard numbers that you got to back this up. Can you just describe what the results you're seeing, when people get real serious about their MindVue?
Well, so I think the biggest lesson, okay, that we want to learn is that these things are not set in stone for a person, all right? They can increase, okay, and we can do this through educational training and development, but there's a whole bunch of other things, Jeff, that can contribute to these factors. It's, as I mentioned, my own journey, right? It's a caring, supportive spouse or loved one, or even your own
Yeah.
children. I was recently, sharing a story about my journey of creating MindVue, Jeff. When I was trying to develop that assessment, it was a bear of a process. I initially wanted to do this just for my dissertation at KU, and they told me, they said, Brian, make that your life's mission, because it's going to take you forever.
You're
And
going to spend the
dang it,
rest of your life working on this one, buddy.
they were right. It was so incredibly hard to do that, and it took us years and years to get that assessment validated and to do all the scientific work behind it. Well, during that time, I was trying to get this large sample size to do all the validation work, and going through all these challenges and hurdles as I was going after getting this assessment created. And I was sitting on the couch one night, just feeling quite miserable, about thinking, how am I ever going to pull this off? Well, before, I was sitting there on the couch, previous couple days before, I was out in the yard with my son. He was at that point in time about 3 years old, and he had these little toys, like a
Yeah.
little Gumby type stretchy leg guy, right? He would like pull it apart and then snap back together. Well, he was kind of like putting it on his finger, and he launched it one day, and he couldn't find it. And he was, walking around finding it. And pretty soon, here's little 3-year-old Henry just losing his mind that he cannot find we call them stretchy legs. They could not find stretchy legs out in the yard. And he was with the neighbor girl at the time, and she's saying, well, it must have went down the drain. It's gone forever, right? And Henry's just sobbing. And I'm thinking, okay, what can we do about this? So I get down on my knees. I say, Henry, I said, you're Davidson, okay? And what Davidsons don't do is we don't give up. We're gonna keep searching. We're gonna find this little stretchy legs. Okay, we're gonna keep searching. We're gonna find this. You got that? And he kind of wiped away the tears, right? And he said, okay. So we go around for about 5-10 minutes, and here, stretchy legs is off in the grass, about 10 yards off, and then we fast forward. Okay, about 6 months later, as I'm sitting on that couch that night, I've got a glass of wine. I'm soaking in my misery about everything that's going on and all these challenges and hurdles that I was facing. And Henry comes up to me. He says, Dad, I can't find Woody's hat. Woody from Toy
Woody,
Story.
yeah. Everybody loves Woody.
He said, I can't find Woody's hat. Can you help me? And I was like, Henry, no, not right now. I'm tired. I'm worn out. I'm just really not wanting to do this. He said, Dad. But Dad, remember, Davidsons don't give up. We keep going. We keep searching, Dad. We don't give up. And I heard that message at that point in time. Again, I was feeling pretty dang low.
You just lost your stretchy legs.
Indeed. But I heard my little, probably about 4-year-old son at that point in time telling me, we don't give up. We don't give up. And so I think that's such an important message that, everybody around us that can help us have that grit, to help us have that resilience, and we're all going to go through those ups and downs of life. But if we have people in our lives that can provide that source of hope for us, that encourage us that we can find a way around this obstacle, or at least, create that sense that we can persevere, that we can bounce back from this challenge, that we can overcome this adversity that we've encountered, that's what gets us through.
You've said this several times in this episode now. It's not just you, but it's the people around you. So it's your son, right? It's Carrie handing you a journal and saying, write it down. It's a researcher, or it's a close friend that comes alongside you and says, look, I know it's hard. We're going to get through this, and I'm going to go through it with you. And I'm going to make sure that you don't give up and that you find the grit. I love this word. Or the resilience to face whatever life is throwing your way. And I think there's a growing, well, it may not be growing, but there's a large percentage of our population that just runs from any adversity, avoids adversity like it's cancer, and tries not to ever get in those circumstances. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying, look, there's something like wrong inside you if you're looking for problems and you want hardships. But the idea of running from it never gives you the chance to find grit, because perseverance, resilience, grit only comes on the other side of hardships, right? I mean, you almost have to go through these things if you find out to find out how strong you really are on the inside. And it's only on the other side of it that you really learn these things.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the activities that we often do with individuals is so we're helping to cultivate some resilience in people is we'll have them write down a list. And we title it "My List of What's Gone Wrong," Jeff. Okay. And
And
then
some
we
people
give
are
them
going to need
about
an extra notebook.
Oh, and we hear this time and time again, especially when we're doing some live
Yeah.
settings, right? Where people say, "Oh, I need another sheet of paper," right? Because they're boom, 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 jotting down all
Right.
these things of my list of what's gone wrong. So we give them, several minutes to write down all those things in their life for the past 3 or 4 years that have gone wrong. And I say, look at that list, okay? And what I want you to do next is I want you to cross out that title, my list of what's gone wrong. And so they cross off that title. And I said, up above that, I want you to write, instead of my list of what's gone wrong, I want you to write my list of what I've overcome.
Oh, that's big right there. Wow, that's powerful.
So now we're shifting the mindset, Jeff, okay, to not see ourselves as a victim of our circumstances, but instead we see ourselves as somebody that has faced a lot of adversity and who has overcome a lot of adversity. Okay, that we don't want to develop that sense of learned helplessness that feels like, oh, there's nothing that we can do about all these situations that are well beyond our control. But instead, you look at yourself and say, look at what I
Yeah.
have overcome. Look at what I've gone through. Look at what I've overcome. And I'm ready to tackle the next challenge
Yeah.
that
For
comes my
some
way.
people, that statement just went right over their heads. But for me, that just hit like a ton of bricks. Because when you look back at some of the big challenges and you start to think, man, that hurt. And that was so hard. I don't ever want to go through it again. But if I could face that in the past, then what's coming my way today or what may be around the corner tomorrow, if I could face what I just went through in the past, then I know I've got what it takes to handle what I'm going through today or what may be coming around the road tomorrow. Like I wrote that down. It made the hair on my forearm stand up. My list of what I've overcome, because that's just a powerful reminder of the grit, the perseverance, the resilience that you've already showed on the inside.
And Jeff, think about all these people that experienced that hardship throughout the
Yeah.
pandemic, right? They were told a message that, this is all beyond your
Right.
control, that there's nothing you can do about this. And that developed a sense of
Yeah.
helplessness. And that helplessness is now contributing to much of the issues that we're facing today. I think back to a study that I read a couple of years back. It looked at, they're trying to look at what predicts internal locus of control. So this is one of the
Mm-hmm.
factors that we measure. And internal locus of control is all about, do you feel like you can influence the outcomes that you experience in your life, that your hard work, your decisions, your efforts, that's what ultimately drives
Right.
many of your outcomes, as opposed to having more of an external locus of control that thinks that
It's
it's all
all out of
about,
my hands.
you got to be
Right.
lucky, right? You got to have the right timing of everything in order to succeed and do well. And the study was looking at all these developing countries across the world, and they were trying to figure out, what were the predictors of whether or not somebody developed an internal versus external locus of control. And when they were looking at an external locus of control, guess what they found was the one predictor among all these variables of what somebody's experienced in their life. It was experiencing a drought by the age of 5 was a strong
Wow.
predictor of whether or not somebody was developing an external locus of control. And get this, they showed that the effect continued with somebody, that they continued to maintain that external locus of control all the way up until the 4th decade
Oh
of
my
life.
goodness. 40 years it stuck
Okay,
with you.
so 40 years, right. Stuck with them into their 40s until that effect started to wane off. Well, you think about why, like what's going on? Well, as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid, okay, if you're hearing your parents say, well, this drought, right, these
Yeah.
weather conditions, this is beyond our
Right.
control. We can't control this, right? This is, influencing our ability to raise these crops, and there's
Yeah.
nothing that we can do. And a child is hearing that message time and time again. That's going to develop this
Yeah.
belief that you really can't influence what happens to you in your
Absolutely.
future. And that stays with somebody. Now imagine what just happened with the pandemic. Okay. We
Yeah.
just
You just
experienced
told
this of hearing this
8 billion
message.
people this is a health drought that's out of our control.
Exactly. And the effect that will have, not just for the next couple of years, but for
Yeah.
decades.
40
Jeff.
years. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. And no question, there are those people that face the drought. It's not raining, the crops are drying up, but and I can't make it rain, but I'm going to do whatever I got to do to just adjust to the circumstances and adapt to what life is throwing at me. And sure, there is still a drought and it's still not raining, but I'm going to figure out a way to adjust, adapt, and to overcome. Those are the three words that used to get tossed around in special operations missions repeatedly. You figure out a way to be flexible, adaptable, and just overcome whatever happens next. You adapt to it and overcome it.
Well, so let me ask you, as somebody that was trained, into adjusting and adapting, what contributes to that sense of mental flexibility? What allowed you to be able to adjust?
Without getting into all of the details, I mean, the truth is that's ingrained from the very start in some of the most skilled special operators and the units. It's part of their DNA. Like the very first missions, oh, here's the plan. You know what? The plan just changed. And hey, you're the brand new guy with absolutely zero responsibility. But because the situation just became catastrophic, I'm now putting you in a position of responsibility. And you got to figure out how to step up and take over. And people's heads are swimming. But you do that often enough, long enough, and they start to figure out, like, I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this, but I'm going to figure out a way next to adapt and overcome. To be flexible enough to face whatever happens next. And I think there's
so that training basically helped to equip them with the belief that I can.
I think there's some real benefits to putting them in those really complex and unexpected situations and just saying, figure it out. And we're going to do our best to try to make you successful along the way, but you got to figure it out, big boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love it.
Hey, listen, man, I could nerd out with you, and I mean this in the most, positive way. I could nerd out with you about sociology for the next 2 hours because I am so fascinated by why does one gal thrive in the exact same situation where another gal just struggles? Why does one guy exceed everybody's expectations and another guy, with every other thing being equal, the other guy just falls flat on his face? And the truth is, you guys have done research that I've just kind of stumbled through my whole life. You guys have done it, and you got the hard work to back it up. So let's say some of the listeners are out there and they're like, man, at the beginning of this episode, I was kind of skeptical, but okay, you convinced me at least enough to take the first step. What is your recommendation? How do they start to become part of that or get connected to MindVue? What do they do next?
Well, definitely if they are interested in learning more, just check out our website. It's mindvue.com, MINDVUE.com.
Let me say that one more time.
If they're
it's
interested.
not VIEW. Tell them the web address one more time. And we'll put a link, by the way. If you're driving right now, we'll put a link in the notes to this.
Yeah, it's MINDVUE, mindvue.com. And they can check out more on the website. We also have the ability to be able to dig in, take the assessment if people are intrigued to see where their own mindset's at. They've got the ability to do that now. So you can go to the website and get that glimpse of where your mindset's at to get a glimpse, right, of what's going on between your ears relative to everybody else out there.
And if people want to know more about you, Brian, how can they connect with you? How can they learn more about you?
Yeah, I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm
all good.
Almost the opposite of that. I do have LinkedIn. So, if they want to reach out, they can find me up on LinkedIn. I'd say maybe that's the spot to go. Feel free to, contact us through our website on MindVue, and one of my colleagues will definitely connect me up with you.
So the best way to reach you is to go through the website and connect with you or your team that way, right?
Yeah, or LinkedIn's fine as well.
All right. Well, and we'll put links, by the way, to your LinkedIn profile on this in the notes to this one as well. Listen, man, I'm thrilled. I have been looking forward to this just because I could nerd out on sociology all day long. But thank you for being a guest on this episode of Unbeatable.
Well, Jeff, I greatly appreciate it. Anytime you want to nerd out, you just let me know.
Sounds good. And tell Carrie, by the way, I wrote a quote down from her, and I'm probably going to use it one day. Why don't you just stop talking about it? Here's a journal, write about it, and then go out and do it.
Go do it.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, man. See you around.
Jeff. I appreciate it. Take care.
Hey, I love what Carrie told Brian. She said, you've talked about it enough. here's a journal, write it down, and then go do it. And it's perfect at the early part of 2023 that we would do this episode with Brian and you would get a chance to hear from him about how you can help be mentally stronger and more prepared for the challenges of 2023. But I can't help but think there are some of you listening who have some big goals and you've not made any progress, or you've actually gone in the opposite direction over the last couple of years. Maybe you need to take Brian's wife's advice. Maybe you need to go grab a piece of paper, write it down, and say, I'm going to start working on this. And then you just get started like Brian did. And pretty soon you keep working at it and you keep working at it. And here's the key, like Brian's son said to him, you don't give up. And eventually you stumble across something beautiful. Eventually you're able to accomplish your goals. Look around and say, wow, yeah, I'm so proud of all that I've been able to accomplish. I hope you were encouraged. I know this episode has probably been a little bit different for you, but I totally buy into what Brian was describing in his MindVue approach. And I hope you're encouraged by what you heard today. If you found this podcast for the first time and you liked what you heard, why don't you go ahead and follow us on your favorite podcast platform? If you are connected with our podcast, but you're not following us on social media, why don't you just go ahead and sign up? Why don't you go ahead and subscribe on YouTube? Why don't you go ahead and follow us on your favorite social media platform? Just search @Unbeatable Podcast. But I recognize there are times in life where you're just really struggling, where you're stuck, and where you need a little motivation. I got a free resource for you. I'm being honest with you. It's totally free. We're not going to ask anything from you. It's called the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide, and it is chocked full. It's a PDF document chocked full of quotes to just help you when you're struck or when you're stumbling, when you're stuck a little bit, to help you find the motivation to handle the challenges that you're going through. If you want this, I'll give it to you totally free, no strings attached. Just go to unbeatablearmy.com and sign up for the survival guide right there. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Unbeatable. And I can't wait for you to hear from my next guest, Ty Herndon, on next week's episode. See you next time.